Hello and welcome to the MikoBits show, and I am your host, MikoBits. Today I've got an exciting show for you, which is Kacper Bak. He is with Quantstamp, and Quantstamp is a very exciting company. They are doing lots of security and technology auditing. So they really want to make sure that whatever smart contracts or whatever technologies you developed in blockchain are actually secure and they actually do whatever it is that you think they should be doing. Before we start, if you're interested in Bitcoin and blockchain, please consider clicking that subscribe button and also click the bell so you can get notifications about future videos that I might post. Thank you. Today's show is actually about Ethereum 2.0. And Ethereum 2.0 is a huge step for the Ethereum community. It's the number 2 valued blockchain on the internet after Bitcoin. And it's moving to a different consensus protocol. So the beating heart, it's actually moving towards a proof of stake mechanism. So this is a very seismic change. And what I wanted to do is bring Kacper onto our show because he's part of the team at Quantstamp that is actually evaluating and ensuring that this is secure and it's safe and it's actually going to be successful. So because of that, we're able to really get a great feeling about how ETH 2.0 is going and where it's headed and what is it going to be like. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my guest, Kacper. Welcome.
Hello, thank you for having
Yeah,
me.
great having you on the show. So first question's real easy, which is tell us a bit about your role, and your organization. So tell us about Quantstamp and tell us about what you do there.
Right, so my name is Kacper, and I'm a senior research engineer at Quantstamp. We are a company that focuses on securing blockchain and applications. So although we focus on security, we also help with blockchain solutions. That includes applications for public blockchains and private blockchains. We did tens, I don't know, or if not hundreds of audits for smart contracts and applications that work on blockchains. And Prism is one of the clients for Ethereum 2.0, for which we recently did the initial audit. And it's pretty exciting because Ethereum 2.0 itself is supposed to launch in July.
Wow, that's pretty soon actually, right? It's pretty much next month.
Hmm. Oh yeah.
So 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 when you say that it's going to launch in July, can you kind of tell me the scope of what it is that we're going to see in July?
Right. Okay. So just to clarify, so they have test nets. So test nets existed for a while,
Yeah,
and by launch I mean that they would like to launch the main net for phase 0 of Ethereum 2.0.
that's exciting.
So Ethereum 2.0 itself is a multi-year project,
Hmm.
and it is a huge step forward, compared to Ethereum 1.0. And they decided to do that in phases. I believe there are 3 phases right now that are defined,
Yeah.
and for each phase there is a specification, and there are multiple clients. And why are they doing that in phases? Well, to first of all, to scope the work, to have some well specified developments and deliverables for each phase, and also to help with testing and ensuring the quality. Once a phase is done, then they would move on to the next one. So
Well, I think that's a very genteel way to put it, right? Because I think the bottom line is that the reason why they're going gradually and in phases is because they really don't want to screw it up, right? Like there's billions of dollars of value in there. And obviously, if it comes out badly, someone like, I think the thing that everybody's really anxiously waiting is, I think what they remember is they remember the DAO hack, right? So,
Mhm.
so the DAO hack was pretty famous, and in fact, the DAO hack resulted in the creation of Ethereum Classic because there was a huge transaction that actually was the result of insecurity, right? And like, just to kind of shine a light on Quantstamp, like, like one could infer that had they had a really nice security audit from Quantstamp, that they might have avoided having this huge theft and having this huge disaster, right? So I think the thing that is important to try to understand is, like, I think the gradualism or the staging. One of the things that happened is that people got mad at Vitalik, and they're like, why is Ether improvement so slow? Right? Why are the improvement projects so slow? And my attitude towards them is, why don't you run a bank with billions of dollars sitting in it, with like thousands, maybe hundreds of, maybe not hundreds, but certainly thousands of hackers trying to steal money? And then why don't you try to upgrade the software for your bank and see
Mhm.
how well that goes, and then come back and then make fun of Vitalik? Like, so why don't you do that exercise before you can complain? Because I
Mhm.
don't think they understand that this is so sensitive, and that this, if someone finds a vulnerability, they could potentially steal millions of dollars, right? And it could be even a very small vulnerability. It could be only open for a very small amount of time, and they could still maybe steal millions or even tens of millions, as happened in the DAO hack, right? So tens of millions were stolen. So I guess, to me, it brings me to ask you the next question, which is like, specifically, what are the kinds of things that you are securing or looking at? Like, what are the things that you are sort of fixing? Or like, what do you have any ideas of these modules? Like, you talked about Prism, so like, what are the modules or components? How do you look at the safety or security of something like this?
Mhm. Yeah. So first, a little bit of context for the phases. So now we are securing the phase one, and phase one itself is very basic in terms of the functionality, because this is really about the proof of stake layer. So there won't be any smart contracts, and actually, like a lot of the concerns that you listed, they relate in the past they related to smart
Got it.
contracts,
Got it.
but this is going to be I believe phase number two, so there is still
Great.
probably years years from now till we see smart
So is this
contracts
is this
running.
uh is this like beacon chain,
Yep,
or okay? So
exactly. So
tell me
that's
a bit
that's
about, so I'd love the audience to understand more about the beacons, and how do they, what are they?
Yeah. So in phase zero, which is called beacon chain, so this is the phase where some primitives such as proof of stake are defined, and then dividing like dividing the whole like progress of the network into epochs, and then picking the committees that can vote and validate blocks. So it's really the very base layer of Ethereum 2.0, on top of which the rest can be built. And this layer replaces a lot of the internals of Ethereum 1.0.
Yeah.
Uh, and you may ask, okay, so what's the relation between Ethereum 1.0 and 2.0? Can you just take the stuff from 1.0 and put on 2.0 right away? So no, you cannot. This will take a while. And one of the key things about Ethereum 2.0 is that it will have shards. So the
Yeah.
network will be partitioned into, let's call them clusters for now, and these clusters will be called shards.
Yeah.
And when Ethereum 2.0 gets integrated with 1.0, 1.0 will become just one of the shards of Ethereum 2.0. And
That's
the
really
different
cool.
clusters. yeah, and they will allow for processing transactions in parallel. So like some of the sequentiality could be reduced, which will have positive impact on the speed of the whole
So
network.
so so it sounds like Ethereum is sort of moving between kind of a from a universe, maybe more into like a multiverse, right? And
Hmm.
really Ethereum becomes a shard of, in effect, of this larger ETH 2.0 like universe.
Yeah, I think it's probably a good way of thinking about it. And now, to make it a bit more complicated,
Yes.
sometimes you will need to have communication between these different universes. Because imagine that you have two smart contracts that exist on different shards,
Yeah.
but let's say your smart contracts needs some data, or maybe needs to update a contract on the other shard. So
Yes.
obviously there will need to happen some communication, or there should be a mechanism that would allow for communication between the two.
Can I ask a naive question, right? Which is, how does this impact the developer paradigm? Because if you have potentially like a cross shard implementation, then it may affect things like orchestration, or it may affect things like the modularity of your original code.
Yeah, this is a very good question. So this whole deal is not fully specified yet. So we don't know yet. Of course, ideally, you wouldn't like to destroy compatibility.
Yes,
Ideally you would like to provide very very similar or improved programming experience and interface. But how this is going to look like, we really don't know.
I see.
Uh,
I see. So
yeah.
the kind of EVM and the kind of SDK implications aren't fully specified even as yet.
Yeah, that's correct. And
Okay.
actually, we don't even know whether we will have EVM. Maybe there will be EWASM, that
Ah,
replaces
yes.
EVM. So like this stuff goes into phase number two, not even phase number one,
Got it.
and phase number two is very much in development.
Yeah, yeah. So you were talking about this beacon effect, right? Because effectively, what has to happen in order to form this is, it sounds like it's almost a layering, right? Like, people
Hmm.
talk about layer two principally in the context of things like channels, right? So this is
Hmm.
not really literally like that, but in effect, what's happening is there has to be a relationship between the beacon and kind of the Ethereum 1.0 chain, right? So there has to be some relationship that is established, whether there's kind of Merkleizing or whether there's some kind of synchronization pattern. So I guess I'm wondering, like, that seems to be one of the biggest technical challenges.
Yeah, I think that we started talking about layers. The term is overloaded.
It is. It is.
Because I think that when you talk about layers, mostly people think about like layer one or layer two
Yeah, yeah.
solution.
Yeah, yeah. The
Like
thing payment
further
channels.
scalability. Yeah. Uh, Myself, like my background is mostly in software development,
Yeah.
so I was thinking about layers in terms of the software architecture.
Yeah,
Um,
that's more of what I'm coming from. Like, I'm not
mhm,
literally saying that these become like a payment channel or a layer two solution. It's not layer two scalability, clearly, like the way that
right.
normal people talk about it. But what I'm
Mhm.
really thinking about is absolutely from a kind of an architecture perspective. When you look at the relationship of the beacon chain back to Ethereum 1, the thing that I'm interested in as well is, I'd love to understand the perception of how the value transfer effect occurs, right? Because, you know, imagine that you're a holder of Ethereum. Currently, it's just called Ether, right? So
Mhm.
imagine you have Ether, right? So now I have Ether. Like, I think one of the things that will dramatically change is the ability to use Ether in a staking action, right? So
Mhm.
is
Right.
that part of this first stage?
Yeah, it is. It is. So yeah, like you mentioned, if somebody wants to be a validator and wants to participate in the network, they need to lock up some ether from Ethereum 1.0
I heard it
to
was 32 ETH.
yep.
Okay.
Exactly. So they need to. So the way it works is that they will need to lock up or send 32 ETH into a smart contract that is on Ethereum 1.0.
Yeah.
And then based on that, like the contract is public, so you can always check the balance of a given validator. And you also have events, so like anybody can listen and can check that you actually submitted 32 ETH. And based on that, you would be allowed to become a validator on Ethereum 2.0.
Here's a
But there
question
is
though.
there is a bridge between the two networks.
That was my question, right? Which is that from the perspective of ETH 2.0, right? The perspective of ETH 2.0, all of the ETH 1.0 data is effectively off chain, right?
Exactly.
So what is the mindset? Like, is it an Oracle mindset? Like, how do you validate, right? Because if an ETH 1.0 node is saying, look, I'm staking, right?
Mhm.
The thing that becomes really interesting is like, who are you, right? Like, you're telling me, I'm telling you that I'm staking 1 billion Ether. Like, should you believe me? Like, how do you know? How do you know whether, right? Because obviously, that's what it says in the contract. The contract says I lock the Ether, but
Mhm.
who is this node? And is this node like a healthy node? Is it a pirate hacker node, or what how does the next chain know under how does it trust the first chain? How does it trust ETH1?
Yeah, so the way you can do that is that you can submit the 32 ETH on Ethereum 1.0
Yep.
together with your public key,
Yep.
and then the clients from Ethereum 2.0, they will know the address of the contract that
Yeah.
is supposed to receive the ETH. And then if you're an owner of the public key, you can always sign the message,
That
and
feels good.
people can verify. I mean, clients can verify
That
that.
feels good.
And one thing that is pretty important is that once you move your Ether to Ethereum 2.0, like there is no way back to 1.0.
That's amazing. So technically, so does this happen as a function of the moment of the staking event? So for example, if I put 32 in the contract, is this a contract that will never release those? Is that what I'm hearing?
So I don't know the full details, but I believe that that's the intention. That's the intention. That once you go to Ethereum 2.0, this is a one way.
Wow, one-way ticket. It's like
Mhm.
it's like traveling through a black hole into another universe, right? Like
Right.
you can't hope to come back.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
hope
yeah.
it's nice there.
Yeah, they were saying it's going to be amazing.
I think that what they're saying is it will be fast, right?
Mhm.
That's the promise, and in a sense, that's kind of the core proposition, which is sort of why, like the why, right? Like the why go through the trouble, right? And I think that the big why has long been in the Ethereum community the answer to the question around scalability, right? So sharding is about scalability, and of course, that's kind of the big sort of reason to migrate to a completely different type of consensus. And
Mhm.
obviously, one of the things that sharding provides is it provides like not just kind of basic performance, but it also provides scalability, right? Because you can kind of arbitrarily add not even just new nodes, but you can add new networks, right? So you can just keep adding arbitrary size networks. And in fact, if you wanted to run a shard that was kind of inside of your own company, you could basically run like however many nodes you want and have it be a shard and be like, this is mine, right? So,
Right.
which guarantees you performance, right? Because they're yours.
Yeah. Well, the other consideration is that well, a lot of people are concerned about using proof of work, which is
Yes.
computation intensive, and it requires a lot of energy.
Yes.
So proof of stake is supposed to replace that. So instead of using the CPU cycles, you basically stake your resources
So
that is
so
heat.
so I have a big question.
Mhm.
So my big question is I'm really interested to understand kind of thus far, and I realize these comparables are kind of maybe bad, but like thus far, if you look at proof of stake chains in the first generation, whose purpose was to basically leapfrog Ethereum, right? What you end up seeing is you end up seeing kind of like these performance chain kind of products like a EOS or or even like a Tron type of a thing, right? So none of which has gotten particularly good reviews from Vitalik, but like I guess for me the question becomes, in a sense, if ETH 2.0 is successful, it will really become kind of a new generation of proof of stake, right? In the sense that, because thus far proof of stake networks have been somewhat challenged. So I think so my question, I guess, obviously there's a lot of implicit questions, but my bigger question is kind of like, how are you confident that this time it's going to work, right? Because I think there are other examples where it's been more difficult.
Yeah, so one of the important features that Ethereum 2.0 was concerned about is to have a proof of stake,
Yeah.
but still be decentralized.
Yes.
Because, like you mentioned, there are other networks that they do have proof of stake,
Yes.
but people have concerns about their centralization. The topic of centralization itself is pretty interesting, because you can always argue that even the proof of work for Bitcoin and Ethereum led to centralization, right? Because you have big pools that you have, I don't remember the exact number, but it's definitely less than 10. You're saying like maybe, I don't know, 5 or 7 pools that may have more than, like 50% of all the hashing power.
Yes.
So
Yes.
definitely a lot of the research in Ethereum 2.0 went into making sure that it is proof of stake infrastructure,
Yeah.
but it is as decentralized as possible and as secure as it can be.
So here's a tough question for you. Tough question is is the design of Ethereum 2.0 too complex?
I mean, too complex compared to what? I mean, yeah, compared to proof of work, it's definitely much more complex. I agree. I agree with that. But whether it is too complex, I'm not sure, because we would have to probably compare to other proof of stake solutions that
Yes.
offer a similar decentralization. Um, and I saw a bunch of them. At least I saw some. Theoretical papers.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not. I'm not sure whether they are significantly more simple, or like, or more elegant than Ethereum 2.0. And I'm pretty sure that over time we will see improvements in all of these networks.
So
Um,
so let me ask kind of maybe a personal opinion, right? Which is having had this occasion to kind of work hard on this kind of upcoming release. I guess my question is are has this been a confidence inspiring exercise, or has this been discouraging? Like, how are you feeling? What's your mood?
so my mood is positive.
Good.
So we've done a lot of audits, like really a lot.
Yeah.
And I don't really want to compare to other projects, because they're
It's quite unique.
yeah, exactly, it's quite unique. However, this is one of the best specified projects I have seen myself.
That's encouraging.
And it is a very big project. And again, like, they put a lot of effort into doing the research and into specifying what the software should
What
do.
was the scope of like Quantstamp's audit? Like in terms of like the what were you responsible for uh, exploring or proving or testing?
Mhm. Okay, so we focused on one client, specifically Prism. Uh, and of course, one of the core things that we checked was that whether it conforms to the specification that was
Yeah.
prescribed by the foundation.
Yeah.
So this is one obvious thing. But other than that, there are a lot of let's say, like, more granular issues. Like, for example, we wanted to make sure that there would be no split in consensus, for example, or that the client can deal with invalid messages that are coming from other clients or
Sure.
from malicious people, or that clients can prevent remote code execution, that there is no loss in data integrity. So also the client was using a lot of they were using database and caches. So you wanted to make sure that everything is in sync. But we also check for best practices, like for example, minimization of code clones, which typically has positive impact on the maintainability. Wanted also to check documentation, because every big project attracts more developers who build upon the project or maybe help with development in the future. So you want to make sure that everything is well
So
documented and it is
so so
accessible.
so so here's a question. So I guess to me, the beating heart of what we're talking about is kind of the novel staking mechanic, right? And
Hmm.
the thing that's really kind of got everyone kind of really on the edge of their seat is that, like, it's possible that this event, once it introduces a staking mechanic, right? Because, just to be super basic, like, the idea that you're helping to secure the network in proof of stake means that you're rewarded by the network, right? So in a sense, like, a staker generally gets rewarded, and in a sense is a bit like a miner, only it's mostly about, this is all stuff that but I just want to get the audience up to speed, right? Which is that what it means is, it means that it's not entirely clear the mechanics, but it seems to me that people, if they stake at least 32
Hmm.
ether, right, then they're kind of now joining this new universe. But in this new universe, they're going to effectively be um, collecting reward for their staking. I mean, I may be using the wrong word, reward, but, like, they're going to be accruing additional, basically benefits, right? So the thing that I think people liken this event to is, in a way, it's almost like, from an economic perspective, people are talking about it in the context of something like the Bitcoin halving event, right? Which is obviously completely economically different, right? Which is, that's a supply cut, and that actually decreases the rewards going to the miners, right? Whereas in this case, obviously, you're increasing the rewards going to the people responsible for securing the network, right? So the people responsible for securing the network are actually getting more rewards by definition, because right now I won't say more, right? Because right now in ETH 1.0, there is kind of proof of work mining, right? So those people will be rewarded less, right? Because it will just stop, right? Presumably. And then how does that work? Like, is it just going to be that as more people start staking, that the network will increasingly be reliant on, like, stakers to secure the network, and increasingly unreliant on miners? So is it just that the mining becomes less and less and less economically important until it goes to zero, or how is that imagined?
Yeah, I think that you're right, because if we switch to proof of stake, then yeah, we do have stakers. We don't have miners, because
Yeah.
they are not needed. And yeah, you use the word reward, and that's what they actually use in the spec. So yeah, so if you're a staker, you propose a block, and the block is correct, then you will get a reward.
Yep.
Of course, there are also penalties. So a lot of the research on Ethereum 2.0 itself went into aligning these crypto economic incentives to make sure that that the honest and useful actors, they are rewarded, while the dishonest actors or malicious actors, they get penalized, so that actually it doesn't make economic sense for them
Isn't
to be
isn't that the
more.
scariest part, though? Like, what I mean by isn't that the scariest part is that, just like Bitcoin,
Mhm.
what you have is, you have different layers of a system that kind of interact in a very fruitful way, right? And so you have a layer that is more like a human behavioral incentive layer, and then it interacts with kind of an infrastructural layer, right? And at the infrastructural layer, what you have is you have kind of a consensus, which is effectively like a distributed database replication protocol, right? So you're, and obviously the consensus part of that protocol is trying to do its best to ensure that the activity on chain has fidelity, right? That you're faithfully reporting what actually happened, the reality of what happened, right? So to me, the thing that is really kind of a big puzzle and maybe something scary is that, as soon as you introduce a staking mechanic, that's a whole potentially novel domain. And the reason why I'm kind of nervous about it is that if you look at game theory in general, like, you can create beautiful mathematical proofs that demonstrate that a person is economically punished for bad behavior. So you can easily show that they're punished, right? And you can easily show that if you mathematically constrain the game they're playing, that they will eventually go away. Right? Because people who repeatedly do those behaviors, you can mathematically show, will eventually end up with 0 stake and 0 ETH, and will just kind of, so they'll be kind of like, okay, we got rid of that person. I'm so happy we're rid of that person, because they just kept doing the wrong thing over and over. But what they don't factor is you're not mathematically able to figure out what game someone actually is playing. So, for example, the idea that someone would take a gigantic stake in the network and then attack the network from the inside, like, it's obviously bad, because the price of Ether would drop, and that would affect the huge amount of Ether that the attacker would be putting at risk. But what you don't know is you don't actually know that the attacker doesn't have a short that's sitting on some other exchange that's actually off-chain, right? So they may actually have a huge bet that's kind of maybe 100x leverage that Ether price will drop, and that you're attacking. You basically create a bomb, you explode it inside the network, watch the price drop, and then you get 100x leverage when it drops, because you've shorted from the outside with leverage. So I guess my question I'm asking you is kind of like, how do you reason about kind of the limitations of game theory, and kind of the idea that the world is an open system, and that the games that people are playing can't be predicted because the world is an open system? So is that a fair complaint?
Well, I mean, yeah, I guess it is. So of course, that makes the whole development, complex. However, to mitigate some of these concerns, like, there are a few things that like, people have been doing to mitigate them.
Yeah.
Of course, one of them is developing this thing in phases. Also, again, like, the people put a lot of effort into the spec. Also, I am aware of some efforts where the spec gets verified in terms of some of the properties. And I know that I believe that was they were able to find some issues with the mechanism of rewards and penalties.
Yeah.
So I don't think that, like, most of the time you cannot provide absolute proofs that something will work or it will not work.
Yes.
However, you can put a lot of effort to mitigate these concerns, and release the network in stages. Starting from the test net, then going to mainnet with phase 0, and so on and so on. But again, like, if you ask me for an absolute proof that something will work, of course, it is not feasible.
Yeah, absolutely. The world is an open system, so I think if someone comes to me trying to sell me a provably fair or mathematically proven construct around game theory, I'll be suspicious straight away. But to me, this is potentially a seismic event in the world of cryptographic assets and blockchain, right? Because if you think about this as an evolution or an evolutionary leap, like, in a sense, like, what we're seeing now is we're seeing already that there is a world of programmable money forming around the DeFi proposition, and this is kind of happening around ETH1, right? And the size of the ETH2 event is actually kind of it's sort of epic, right? So I think, in my view, if ETH2 is successful at transitioning into this new world or universe or multiverse, then it seems likely to me that the Ethereum coin market cap will flip in Bitcoin, right? Because the total value will increase, right? Now, one of the things that's complex about this is it seems evident that since the programming model is likely to be fundamentally different as a function of the sharding, it's going to be unlikely that DeFi contracts written in the ETH1 chain will have the same meaning in ETH2, right? So it's a very complicated kind of transition.
Maybe.
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 Say
Imagine
more.
that if you I agree with a lot of the stuff that you said. However, if you imagine that the contracts, the DeFi contracts that work together, because typically like they're composed, right? This is why DeFi is exploding right now, because people can build on top of the existing contracts and the existing work. I believe that if you imagine that there is a DeFi shard, yeah, let's call it a DeFi shard, and
Yeah.
all of the DeFi contracts they're in one DeFi shard,
Yeah.
then probably that should not be very different from what we are seeing right now.
Yes.
But if they get spread out across different shards, yeah, like you said, this may have a big impact on how you integrate them and how you reason about them, from the point of view of a developer.
I
Again,
think
I
one of the
believe.
one,
Mhm.
I think one of the things that's become clear is that most of the killer applications in DeFi are actually not really that high frequency. They're fair. Like if you look at something like lending, like
Mhm.
people need to do something with the money. Once you borrow it, then now you need to do something. And most of what people are doing is they're kind of doing margin trading, or but the point is that there's no meaning of lending something for a microsecond and then putting it back in, unless you're doing some kind of really weird, like liquidity farming or some kind of arbitrage loop, or which we did see in the kind of maker ecosystem. We saw some bad,
Right.
like Oracle DDoS attacks and kind of these arbitrage loops that were kind of sucking value out for a limited time. But I guess what I'm really trying to poke at is that since DeFi itself actually seems to be more economically constrained than it does performance constrained, then this kind of hypothetical DeFi shard could just be the Ethereum 1 universe, right? So DeFi could potentially just stay there. And, there might be some weird new organisms that become kind of ETH2, multiverse DeFi products, but like it may just be that the base of it stays in ETH1 because so far it hasn't really been that badly performance bound.
I think you're right. But for example, recently the price of transactions went up a lot. And if you
Yeah.
want to use some of the contracts that, for example, provide this yield farming functionality, actually I tried doing that myself a few days ago, and there was one transaction. It was very big. I think it had like 50 arguments or so.
Wow.
Anyway, basically for that one transaction, I paid I think about $15, and I didn't even put a high price on gas.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I think I see that too. I see that too. As we start to do kind of maximum yield farming, and we start to do kind of really interesting things with InstaDApp and like Compound, so as we start to kind of like
mhm.
play these things, like it can get reasonably computationally intensive. And I agree with you. Like the gas prices can go up. You can definitely pay $5. You can pay 15 as you did, and it has to be worth it. I learned something interesting today from Outlier Ventures, which is I learned that the average basically loan on the Compound chain is 400K, which that may be a median rather than, well, no, median is wrong. That may actually be an average, but it's clear that there are some very large super whales that are playing in this pond. So I think because of that, I think $15 becomes pretty acceptable. But like, but I agree with you. It may force the evolution of these kind of micro uh, types of it may be that ETH 2.0 becomes the home of sort of micro DeFi, right? Because which means like a very very low transaction cost, and and how is that envisioned in terms of the transaction cost?
Yeah, so I'm not sure about the transaction cost itself, but you see, like one of the important promises of the blockchain is to make things more accessible and cheaper. And of course, if you have 400K, to play with, then perhaps $15 doesn't matter. But if you have much lower amounts that perhaps a lot of retail users would have and they would like to play with, then $15 they may be pretty significant. It may really cut into the yield that that you may imagine. So like certainly making the infrastructure cheaper is still a very very important point, because if it's not cheaper, then you may as well use centralized solutions.
Yeah, this actually hits exactly my core thesis in terms of investment in any blockchain technology, which is what I call open source financial infrastructure, right? And the whole point is to lower the cost of the infrastructure, right? Like that's why we're doing any of this, right? And the question, and if people find that to be maybe boring, where they're like, well, it's cheaper, right? And it's like, well, why is it cheaper? It's free, it's open source, so it's cheaper, right? But and people are like, well, so why is that interesting, right? But what they don't necessarily understand is if you lower the cost to participate, then you actually increase the total rate of innovation on top of the platform, right? And when you look at programmable money, by lowering that cost, you can actually create potentially thousands of applications that previously were like wouldn't make sense. Like it's like, well, we can't do that, it's too expensive. It's like, oh, now you can, right? And not only too expensive, but it's kind of completely like the world, because the original promise of the Ethereum white paper, going back to it, is the world computer. Right? Now, what we know that the Bitcoin white paper promised a peer-to-peer electronic cash, which we did not get. And the Ethereum white paper promised a world computer, which we did not get, right? So, unfortunately, a lot of ICO white papers didn't give us what they said they would give us. But the thing that I think is exciting is that it feels like ETH 2.0 continues to execute towards that vision, and we continue to see significant progress. So as a closing, do you have any other kind of comments or words of advice to people looking into the ETH 2.0?
This is so certainly this is very very exciting work. And again, I wouldn't say that I am surprised, but I really want to stress that there are a lot of people who put really a lot of effort into developing this project and making it as good as it can be. And I was pretty impressed to see how much specification they had. Because a lot of you don't really see that in a lot of projects that are developed in the open world. So I really have, I would say I have high hopes, and I do think that this project can be successful. And although it takes probably much more time than people thought to develop it, but like you said, there are a lot of important concerns, and there is really a lot of value at stake to make sure that they succeed.
Well, this has really been wonderful, and on behalf of myself and my audience at MikoBits, we're just really grateful at having your expertise, your perspectives, your opinions on this show. It's just really been it's been terrific, and I think we're just getting our initial dip into the waters of ETH 2.0, and we're all super excited to see what happens in July.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Thanks very much.